An Italian YouTuber is facing 3 years in prison and a 15,000 euro fine for using retro handhelds and emulating ROMs. But the story goes much deeper than news outlets and other videos have covered. So we're gonna go through it and some strange twists along the way in this video. This video is gonna be a little different than my usual content because we're just gonna focus on what's going on with this YouTuber, what led up to this point, and what details got left out along the way. Because I found a couple things that might be a little damning. This story starts in the present day. Once We're Nerd is an Italian YouTuber who makes content on retro games, handheld gaming, mini PCs, and most importantly, retro handhelds. Over the last 5 years, he's amassed a substantial audience of over 50,000 subscribers, with most of his videos averaging between 10 to 30,000 views each. He's showcased handhelds from Ambernick, Powkitty, and TrimUI, and all those other handheld makers, but those ones specifically tend to include ROMs, thousands of them that may or may not have been legally acquired. So apparently agents of the Guardia di Finanza, probably messed up that pronunciation, showed up to his house in April and confiscated everything. And I mean everything, including handhelds, a complete backup of emails, WhatsApp conversations, Facebook messages, and even confiscated his phone to make a forensic backup. And then they didn't return the phone for 2 months. But it gets worse because the investigation could lead to criminal charges with a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison and a 15,000 euro penalty, completely nuking this guy's life over handhelds and gaming. By the way, you can see in this official notice, they're specifically accusing him of advertising illegal handhelds that reproduce Nintendo and Sony games to facilitate the sale of those handhelds. But according to Once We're Nerd, he allegedly never used a referral link for any official handheld retailer. The irony of this notice is that Ambernick consoles are openly for sale on Amazon Italy, but Amazon Italy is too profitable for the Guardia di Finanza, so they're not going after little old Amazon. But this is nothing new for Italian authorities. They are very heavy-handed when it comes to copyright infringement and copyright protection. So let's lay the groundwork and look at how Italy has cracked down on the injustice of piracy in recent times. There's a BBC article from September of 2024 titled "Fake Retro Video Game Ring Worth 50 Million Euros is Smashed in Italy." That's a big victory for absolutely no one except for authorities. Turns out that a video games trafficking ring had been smashed by police in Italy after fake vintage consoles and games worth almost 50 million euros were seized. Now that number was clearly pulled out of someone's ass. Alessandro Langella, probably butchered that, head of the economic crime unit for Turin's financial police, came up with this 50 million euro evaluation, a figure which includes the value of the consoles and hundreds of licenses for pirated programs. Again, clearly incentivized to inflate the value of this whole situation, but I digress. Around 12,000 consoles holding over 47 million pirated video games. 47 million! Oh no! And to bring justice to this cruel and dangerous operation, the seized games have been destroyed, and 9 people have been arrested and charged, facing up to 8 years in prison. So that's just great. And a real zinger at the end here, they say that a sealed copy of Super Mario 64 sold at auction for $1.5 million. So for all we know, every copy of Super Mario 64 is $1.5 million, so pay up if you're playing a ROM. And another example of Italy just laying down the hammer is when they demanded that Google poison DNS under strict piracy shield law. This is another article from Ars Technica from back in March 2025. Italy went after Italian internet service providers and other international firms like Cloudflare to poison the back end of these websites through DNS to block content before it could even be accessed in any way. It caused a ton of collateral damage. They were going with the goal of blocking bootleg soccer streams, but they ended up blocking the entire Google Drive domain, which people rely on for a lot of very important stuff stuff because somebody was using it to share copyrighted material somewhere. Literally poisoned the entire well because they wanted to get one little roach out of it. And on top of this, the court was threatening Cloudflare with fines of up to 10,000 euros per day if it didn't begin blocking certain sites. So this brings us to the Once Were a Nerd YouTube channel, where this YouTuber was making money either directly or indirectly from emulating handhelds and ROMs in general. But this is where the story takes a big twist. I did a little bit of investigation to really get to the bottom of what led us to this point, because I felt like there's some details missing. As I was learning more about the situation, I came across a couple Reddit comments saying that he had been sharing ROMs, which is a cardinal sin of emulation. You don't share ROMs, don't share links to any copywritten material. So I did some investigation and found in the Wayback Machine that on July 16th of this year, he had been sharing links to exactly where to download ROMs and BIOS files. And as of the time I'm recording this video on July 19th, his guide on how to download ROMs with direct links to those ROMs is still live on his website. So the evidence is really damning for the Italian financial police, who have been actively cracking down on this exact kind of stuff. And another big mistake that Once Were a Nerd made is that he auctioned off these handhelds with all those ROMs on the SD cards as well, and advertised the listings as such. So in the eyes of the Italian authorities, he is directly profiting from the distribution of copywritten material. In a lot of other places in the world, it's more of a legal gray area, and punishments are far more lenient in terms of distributing handhelds with games that are 30 or 40 years old. Italy has a history of cracking down much harder on the kind of behavior that Once Were a Nerd was doing. So it seems like that official notice from earlier, where the Guardia di Finanza got a search warrant based on Once Were a Nerd promoting Ambernick handhelds, was just a way for them to get a foot in the door and get a hold of his phone, his email records, his WhatsApp and Telegram, and basically everything, so they can make an example out of him. He made 3 big mistakes in this situation. 1, he distributed ROMs, ROM sets, and sources of where to download ROMs directly. 2, he shared a direct link of downloading BIOS files, which are also copyright material. And 3, he sold handhelds with SD cards filled to the brim with copywritten material. Now, for the record, I don't condone piracy or the illegal acquisition of games that you do not physically or digitally own directly from the publishers. But this is clearly a show for Once Were a Nerd, and I feel terrible for anyone having to end up in this situation, facing a huge 15,000 euro penalty and a possible prison sentence. Not to mention, this is an extreme invasion of privacy to completely carbon copy his phone, all of his communications, confiscating all of his gaming handhelds like there's some kind of dark web substances. The fact that authorities are cracking down so heavily on copyright law just shows where their priorities are at. And it's in the wallets of big business instead of the protection of the common folk. Now, this is a hard topic to talk about, given the fact that I've showcased a lot of the similar retro handhelds that he had confiscated from him, and showcased a lot of games that I obviously own licenses to. So my take on this situation is this is a very draconian, heavy-handed way of addressing what is really not a big problem in the broader scope of anything. The soul of retro gaming is in the appreciation of games which are pieces of art, and the preservation of said art digitally and physically. So what is the goal here? This is a really shitty situation, especially being on the receiving end of such a heavy-handed punishment and just kind of being threatened and bullied by these authorities. I think we'd all prefer if the authorities either didn't go after people as if they were criminals, or maybe just cut off the supply chain from Chinese distributors instead of going after a YouTuber. There were some very pertinent details left out of Once Were a Nerd's video that might have provided a little more context to what led up to this whole situation. Seeing those articles that are still up as of the time of recording this video, they provide more context to the situation, and now we understand it's more than just owning these retro handhelds that's the problem. It's spreading ROM websites and the ROM sets and direct download links and selling handhelds with SD cards. And if it's not clear at this point, don't do any of this kind of stuff. This is a cautionary tale of somebody who flew a little too close to the sun and was a little too careless when it came to sharing legally acquired ROMs and BIOS files, especially living in a place with a history of cracking down on pirated content. So that's the situation in a nutshell. There's probably more details that have yet to surface, but these were things that I found directly from the YouTuber, the perpetrator, the criminals YouTube sites in the Wayback Machine. I hope this gives you a better understanding of the situation and why it's so insane. Again, I feel really bad for this dude. Nobody should be in this situation for playing games on handhelds. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe for weekly news, reviews, and tutorials too, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.